Hey Eagle fans, it's EaglefanKarl, and we are almost 24 hours into the free agency period, and already there's obviously been a lot of big news as it relates to what the Eagles are doing in free agency. So I just thought I'd give you a few of my thoughts on what the Eagles have done so far, and maybe what they could be doing moving forward. The first person I want to talk about is someone they didn't sign. There was a report on the eve of free agency that the Eagles were going to be signing Kenny Britt, who was the receiver for the Rams. He ultimately ended up going to the Cleveland Browns. When I was looking at things Wednesday night after the news came out that they had signed Kenny Britt, I was trying to get myself excited about that signing. So when I found out Thursday morning that he was going to the Browns instead, I was actually relieved, because I think that was a bullet we dodged. I just really didn't see how he fit into what we were going to be doing on offense. He really didn't add another dimension that we didn't already have. Granted, he would have been an upgrade over what we had. That was the only thing I could really say positive about him, is the fact he didn't drop balls like Nelson Aguilar and all those guys. But he really wasn't going to add anything beyond what we already had, and he was going to end up being a lot like Jordan Matthews, more of like a slot receiver, maybe a number two, but clearly was not a number one wide receiver. And if they were going to go there for a number one wide receiver, I was going to be really disappointed. Obviously, then the news came out on Thursday then, early in the morning, that the Eagles had signed Torrey Smith, who had been released, obviously, the day before, earlier in the week by the 49ers. So the Eagles could actually sign him before free agency started, since he had been outright released. So the Eagles signed him before even free agency officially began. And that was a pick. At first, I was like, what are they doing with this? But then as I really started thinking about it, I think it made a lot of sense. And I actually had texted one of my cousins when they asked me what I thought about it. This was still yesterday afternoon, before the news about Alshon Jeffery came out. I had said, I was okay with the move if it was one of two moves they were going to make as it related to wide receiver, whether that was in free agency or the draft. I think they needed someone else, because Torrey Smith, I think, is, a lot of people have said it already, but I'll say it again. Torrey Smith is a great guy to stretch the field. He's got a lot of speed, but he's not a number one wide receiver. He's not going to be your main go-to guy. He's the guy that can stretch the field so the other guys, a number one wide receiver or your tight ends, even Jordan Matthews, if he's playing in the slot, can really have a lot of success if someone like Torrey Smith can open up the deep part of the field, so that the safeties have to respect that. It opens up the underneath stuff. So I really liked the move from that perspective, but if it was going to be the only move they were going to make, whether in free agency or the draft, I was really concerned. So obviously, I got real excited when later in the day, the news came out that, of course, we had signed Alshon Jeffery. I know a lot of people are concerned the fact that it's only a one-year contract. And Torrey Smith, by the way, is really only a one-year contract. I know they're saying it's a 3-year deal, but really what it is it's a one-year deal with 2 option years for the Eagles to pick up then if they want. So they actually got Torrey Smith. If he turns out to be a good player, they can actually keep him for 3 years. Alshon Jeffery, though, is only in the squad for 1 year. They'd have to sign him to a longer-term deal. And I think this is basically sort of a prove-it contract. They're trying to basically saying, all right, what can you do? Can you stay, out of a suspension? Can you stay, where you're not getting hurt? Because he had missed games for injuries the last 2 seasons. So I think it was more of a prove-it contract. Nobody doubts Alshon Jeffery's talent. I think everyone knows he's got the talent. It's whether he can put it together for a full season. Now, obviously, there was some things going on with Alshon Jeffery that relates to, what was going on in Chicago and the fact that he missed games. Because if you look at his stats, even for the last 2 seasons, they don't really jump out at you in terms of what he's done over the last 2 years. But if you really look at him overall, I think what he can really do for the team, he is that number one wide receiver that we were so sorely missing last year, and he can start to develop a rapport, hopefully, with Carson Wentz and really sort of take his game to the next level. The one thing I found really interesting is as I was doing work yesterday, I also had 97.5 The Fanatic on, and they were, of course, updating things as they were coming out. And right before 4 o'clock hit, when free agency began, there was a report out that a new team had entered the mix for Alshon Jeffery, and it happened to be the Minnesota Vikings. And apparently, from what I've heard, Minnesota offered him a longer-term deal, but it was going to be for less money. And ultimately, Alshon Jeffery decided he'd rather go with the one-year deal for a little bit more. And apparently, the quarterback here was a big reason why, which just has just a little bit of, it's just a little bit sweet, the fact that he decided to take the Eagles rather than going to Sammy Sleeves with the Minnesota Vikings. So I just really enjoyed that little tidbit. So the fact that he's picking the Eagles, I think, is number one, he believes in himself. He thinks he can really prove that he's really worth that probably 16 or 17 million a year that he thinks he's worth, and he thinks that Carson Wentz is the best guy to partner up with to try and do that. So all those things together, I think, really speak well for Carson Wentz. He's going to be maybe a reason why some of these guys are going to want to start coming to the Eagles. But I think it does sort of create a sort of weird dynamic for the Eagles going into the draft and whether they need to really address wide receiver in the draft or not. So that's a thing that's a discussion for a later day when I start getting into my draft previews. But that's something to sort of keep in the back of your mind, is that Alshon Jeffery is only here on a one-year deal, and so there's no guarantee you're going to be able to keep him beyond 2017. So think about that as we're looking at draft picks. Now, of course, that was not the only thing that the Eagles did as it related to free agency. They also did some stuff as it related to the offensive line, which I found very interesting. The one guy that they did sign from another team is Chance Warmack, who is a guy from the Tennessee Titans. He plays guard. And really, it's a question mark as to what they're going to do with him. There was reports earlier this week that Alan Barbery was maybe looking for the Eagles to trade him, but that's apparently not going to happen. So then the question really becomes, well, what are they doing with Chance Warmack, and why are they signing him? And I think that really comes down to the fact that it's once again, it's a one-year deal. It's a really cheap deal. And I think the Eagles are really sort of hedging their bets as it relates to the offensive line, because they don't know exactly what is going to end up happening on the offensive line, both in terms of guys that they have already and potential guys that they might release and potential guys they could potentially draft, or even rookies that they had this past year as to what they could actually do. So I think this is really a signing that was meant to hedge their bets as it relates to the interior of the offensive line and provide some depth, if nothing else, as it relates to the offensive line. But that leads to another interesting signing that was announced today, and that's that the Eagles have re-signed Steven Wisniewski to a 3-year deal. He signed a 1-year deal last year with the idea that he wanted to start. The fact that they are signing Wisniewski to a 3-year deal leads me to believe that Jason Kelce is on his way out. I think that this is a move you make if you are going to make a change at the center position, because the one good thing about Wisniewski is he can play guard or center, so he could play the center position. So that means that what you could do going into the season, if you get rid of Jason Kelce, which would free up cap space, which would be a big reason why they'd want to do it. He's also turning 30 years old this year, and frankly, one of the things I had said throughout the season was I just thought he was a little bit undersized, and I think he was getting beat, and it was one of the reasons why the Eagles really didn't have any sort of a push in the interior line when they were in short yardage situations. So I think moving on from Jason Kelce makes a lot of sense. But what this does is it allows you to have a veteran presence at center that you could count on. But then it also then maybe allows you, because I think the Eagles really see maybe Isaac Seumalo as the center of the future. So you can try Isaac Seumalo at center and play him at center, and if he doesn't work out, you've got Wisniewski to fall back on, but then that also allows you to play Wisniewski out at one of the guard positions to start if they decide to move on from Barbery. And it also then of course, Warmack just provides a lot of depth behind all those guys. So I think all these moves are designed to really set up some flexibility that they'll have in the interior offensive line while still moving on from Jason Kelce. Because the one concern, if you watch the preview videos I did when I was looking through all the different positions, the one concern I had of moving on from Jason Kelce was that meant you were really going to be relying on a rookie in Isaac Seumalo, or he would be in his second year next year. And that really concerned me. So I think the fact that what they're doing with Wisniewski is it's going to allow them to move on from Kelce, but still provide some veteran backup in case Seumalo doesn't work out. So I would expect that Jason Kelce is going to be the next guy they're going to move. My Expectation is they're probably going to try and trade him, and maybe they can get something back for him, probably like a late round pick. But my guess is that ultimately at the end of the day, if they can't get anything back for him, Jason Kelce is going to get released, and that will be the end of the Jason Kelce era, and we'll be moving on with either Wisniewski or Seumalo as our center for 2017. And then the final guy that was announced yesterday that the Eagles had signed, one of the unrestricted free agents we had this year was Naja Ahmed, who was a backup linebacker, special teams player. Once again, if you watched my videos when I was doing the position by position review, he was the one guy I said of all the unrestricted free agents we had, he'd be the one at the top of the list that I'd want to see the Eagles re-sign. So obviously, I think that's a great move. He provides depth at the linebacker position that he's shown last year that he can play that linebacker position if he needs to, but he really adds a lot as it relates to the special teams. And for those reasons, he's an invaluable player that they have on the team. I think lots of times some of these smaller signings get overlooked, but you've got to fill out your roster with some of these guys that sort of are versatile in what they can do with special teams and also playing backup roles. And Naja Ahmed was a great player for us last year in that role, and I think he can be a great player for us this coming year in that role. So I'm a really big fan of that move, and I'm a really big fan of keeping Naja Ahmed on the team. So that's my recap of what's happened so far in the free agency. Leave your comments below. Let me know what you think. Do you like the signings? Are you worried about the fact Alshon Jeffery's only here on a one-year deal? Are you worried about Jason Kelce moving on? Are you a Kelce fan and you want to see him stay? Or do you think I'm wrong about that? Do you think they'll keep him regardless of these signings that they made? Leave your comments below. Let me know what you think. Once again, as the free agency stuff happens, I'm probably just going to be doing some of these videos where I recap a few of the moves that they make. I'm not going to be doing one necessarily every time after every move, but I'll try and do one of these where I look at a few of the different moves that they've made and sort of give you my reaction till then. Until then, fly Eagles fly.